Satnam, beautiful Sovereign Sister, and welcome. Welcome to this last episode of the Sovereign Sister Movement Podcast for 2025. And today we're going to prepare to reclaim our sovereignty for 2026 and beyond, because 2026 is a huge, huge threshold for humanity. We're moving into a time where reality itself gets harder to trust. What is real? What is an illusion? And it's not just emotionally, we're also talking about this culturally and digitally. And when reality gets harder to trust, the first thing that gets targeted is this: a woman's discernment, her intuition, her ability to face life feeling safe in her body. That is sovereignty. This is especially true if a woman is a first time generational cycle breaker like you, a woman who has experienced trauma. And what woman hasn't? 95% of trauma is generational, that gets keep passed down and down from one generation to the next. And the thing about this is that when the nervous system learns to live through danger, the nervous system then doesn't feel safe to exist, which is why we don't feel safe in our bodies. But we also learn a lot of survival strategies to cope. We learn how to outsource our safety, our sovereignty, whether we're outsourcing our safety to a relationship that we think is going to save us, whether we're outsourcing our safety and our sovereignty to leaders like government, even spiritual leaders, or health healers, thinking that they can fix us and that there is even something to fix. We outsource our safety to identities, false identities that we create to survive and to try to fit in a very sick society. But today, we're going to remember, not even learn, we're going to remember together something very simple and very clear that has to be your North Star for 2026 and beyond. We are crossing this major turning point in 2026 where your ability to feel like that you are protected through God and feel safe in your body, it's not paranoia, it is sovereignty. Your protection, in fact, is the inner sanctuary that you are hopefully rebuilding through Kundalini Yoga meditation. But if we're not rebuilding that inner temple and we're outsourcing our power, then 2026 is going to feel like the pressure cooker that could be what really puts us in these states of consciousness, of darkness, not realizing how much opportunity and what an amazing time this is actually for humanity. So today, on this very last episode of the Sovereign Sister Movement Podcast, we're going to be talking about why 2026 will pressure test your discernment as reality gets blurrier, digitally, culturally. We're going to look at a very, very important conjunction that hasn't happened for 6,000 years, the beginning of time, Saturn, Neptune at 0 degrees. I'm going to give you some historical data. When has this shown up before? What happened the last time it showed up at 0 degrees? We're going to look at why this era makes false sanctuaries easier to build, charlatans, and easier to mistake for God if you are especially a first time generational cycle breaker. We're going to look at the differences between devotion versus dependency and how to tell in your body why, because we're also going to talk about trauma bonding. We're going to look at what it is. Many first time generational cycle breakers don't know what that is, and they're actually doing this with false entities that instead of showing them how to be a teacher, meaning how to live by example of the Christ so that others can also live that way, how they get put into these trauma bonds, into these toxic relationships where you feel like you absolutely need the other person in order to survive, heal, or evolve as a human being. And then we're going to look at some solutions. We're going to look at, from a Course in Miracles perspective and Christ consciousness, why you are the Christ. why we do not accept ourselves as the Christ light, and what we need to do in order to feel safe in our bodies so that this can become an embodied experience. Because that's what not just 2026 is about, but this entire new era of the age of Aquarius, which we've now stepped into. We've closed out a 20,000 year cycle of the age of Pisces, and many of us are grieving the transition of an old life. But if we don't understand and connect the dots as to what's happening, we're going to believe that this is a downfall for humanity when in fact, this is us entering into the golden age of consciousness. This is us creating this new earth intentionally, hopefully, mindfully, and hopefully through God, not just on our own. So, we're going to look at some ways for you to learn to discern 2026 and moving forward so that you can truly reclaim your sovereignty, because that's what generational healing is all about. When your nervous system becomes safe enough to choose differently, what gets passed down not just changes, but also your entire life changes. You are able to connect to the truth that you were never ever separate from God. So, in this very last episode of 2025, it is just very crucial to understand and know that we're entering into a time where reality is completely being redesigned, completely digitally, socially, spiritually. And when the truth gets blurry, what happens? Vulnerable nervous systems are targeted. This has happened prior in humanity, in the history of humanity, which we're going to go through today. Now, the sanctuary, which is a sovereign sisterhood sanctuary for first time generational cycle breakers, which is our community of women like you, healing not just themselves, but seven generations before and after us, it was created to rebuild inner authority so that women like you, first time generational cycle breakers, cannot be manipulated spiritually, in relationships, and culturally. All of that is what the Sovereign Sister movement is all about, what this podcast, the focus is all about. And we do this through Kundalini yoga, meditation, Kundalini yoga therapy as a trauma informed Kundalini yoga therapist that helps you re educate the nervous system and the brain so that there's safety in your body, in your soul, and you're not outsourcing your safety. We work through this through A Course in Miracles, Christ Consciousness, Jesus Christ's teachings. It's spiritual psychotherapy on steroids because it's shifting your perceptions into truth. It's bringing healing at the level of the mind. We have to take a holistic approach of body, mind, and spirit. And together, when we do this, peace, which is the new frequency for your future generations, it just becomes livable. Discernment becomes very, very neutral and steady, and inheritance changes completely. Now, women who are the first in their family line to end the cycle, like you, who want God led healing without trauma bonding, without guru culture or spiritual bypassing, and who are ready to train sovereignty in the body, that's the women that I'm speaking to here. Because what you are not is you're not especially someone who is here to trauma dump. That's not what our sanctuary is about and what this movement is about. This is not about you needing to tell your story in order to belong to the space. In fact, you continuing to tell your story is actually your brain doesn't know the difference between a perceived and an actual experience. So you are re-identifying with that story, which is fueling up all of the chemicals in your body again, the cortisol and adrenaline. That's why Freud was a fraud. He was the psychotherapist who said you have to go to your past and relive it over and over. And to me, he was a spy who was used to keep people under the same almost like religious programming of, even though he wasn't religious, of like suffering is actually spiritual when it's not. Why would God want you to suffer? So it's not about the sanctuary, and this movement is not about you telling your story to belong, because if you practice the Kundalini yoga and the Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy, those memories are going to fall from the body where the body keeps score. So you won't have to talk about them. You also, this movement is so important to understand that it's not a guru led identity movement. It's not a high vibe, all love and live bypass community. We're not a space that replaces your own sovereignty in a way where you bypass, where you take do not take personal responsibility for what you are co-creating, not in a shameful, guilty way, but in a way that actually gives you back your power because you can control only what you can control and you can release what you cannot control, which most of the times is others, right? The sanctuary and this movement is not a place where dependence is called devotion. You're taught how to heal yourself. There's no gatekeeping. And what we promise in this movement, in this community, is stronger discernment so you can make choices. The connection to God within you, not a God outside of you. A nervous system that is regulated because that is the highest form of generational wealth. Being able to set boundaries, not because you need to protect yourself and not with guilt, but because you know that you're setting boundaries so that that person is protected and so that the from themselves, because obviously if they're breaking boundaries, that's a self attack, that's a call for help. So you get to create these Christ consciousness boundaries that will protect that person from themselves without any guilt, and that will also liberate you and that person from repeating those patterns. What we do promise inside of this movement of the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary is devotion without losing yourself, devotion to higher power within, peace that holds under pressure. You are the rose that blooms. And when you bloom and you share your fragrance with others, that's prosperity. But if you're a rose that has not tended to the ancestral garden through meditation, there's a lot of weeds. And the first storm that comes will topple you down. And you will not be able to bloom because we haven't tended to the garden. So this is not all love and light. There are things that need to be pruned. There are emotions that need to be felt. And this is why this movement and community, the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary, is a new legacy pattern for your entire family line. In a nutshell, and this is so important, why I'm starting with this is because the world will never be the same and will be completely unrecognizable. And these are the standards that you must learn to live with, because it's not just what I'm saying, it's what Jesus Christ and all the great masters like Krishna came to teach us. Now, in a nutshell, I help first time generational cycle breakers like you rebuild that inner sanctuary so that God can lead their life from within. And we do that through trauma informed Kundalini Yoga therapy, A Course in Miracles informed spiritual psychotherapy. We re educate the nervous system and the brain. And if you have been feeling, especially that life has forever changed and you cannot go back to the old ways of guru dependency, religious dependency, trauma bonding, then this is the space for you. And you know that if you've been with us, especially the last 10 weeks on this podcast, we have gone together through each of the systems of your body. We looked at the circulatory system, the respiratory system, the endocrine system, the nervous system, urinary system, reproductive system just last week, endocrine system, digestive systems. We looked at how each of these systems, how generational trauma impacts them, but we also looked at the solutions, the root cause solutions on how to heal and in the pattern at the root through Kundalini Yoga therapy and A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy. So if you missed any of those podcast episodes, check them out right here on the podcast. And of course, if this is already resonating, I would highly appreciate a like, drop a heart below in the comments, share it with other women that are ready to, and not only just end the cycle, but to remember who they are and reclaim their sovereignty. Each of these podcast episodes took you through the journey of understanding your body scientifically, energetically, spiritually, understanding why you're not broken, and more importantly, how to get to the root cause to heal. So check those out here on my podcast. Now, as we close out 2025, it's important for us to now really look at what 2026 is all about. And there's so many things astrologically that are happening. As you know, astrology is one of the oldest sciences. I've practiced astrology since like 2008 and studied it, and I always coordinate it and use it with whatever I'm working with within my community, the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary and generational healing, because as above, so below, there's an incredible story that the cosmos tell us that then we can use for self-realization to understand ourselves. And so before we get started in today's podcast episode, it's very important to understand one major transit that is happening in February 2026. Because if we can understand this, we can understand why it's more crucial than ever for you to reclaim your sovereignty. And then we're going to go into the actual solutions, how to step into this vibration 2026 and beyond, how to really walk the talk of the Christ consciousness and feel not just protected, but safe in our bodies, being ourselves. So, what I'm referring to first that we need to address is that in February 2026, there's a really rare astrological meeting that hasn't happened for almost 6,000 years, if not more. Because the more we go back into history, especially as it relates to astrologically, it almost gets even blurrier and it's harder to discern. But what I'm referring to is that in February 20th of 2026, Saturn and Neptune are going to come conjunct at 0 degrees Aries. And this is a big deal. And I'm going to break down historically what has happened before. Because, like I said, we can't even, the farthest back that we can go back to 0 degrees of Aries is 6,000 years ago. We can't even go back to looking at this within that 0 degree mark. So we have to look at other transits that occurred within like 27 degrees of Aries because all of these degrees of Aries, they tell a story. The later into the degrees, the more of a closing of a cycle. The earlier in the degrees, like this one, 0 degrees, that truly marks a brand new beginning. One that, again, you and I have never experienced, and most of our ancestors have not. I mean, this is marking the beginning of time. So what we're referring to is Saturn and Neptune, which that in itself, that transit happens every 36 years. But what's really rare is this 0 degrees at Aries, the first degree of the zodiac. Saturn and Neptune are really known in the astrological world as sentinels of reality. And this is why I'm talking about discernment and being able to understand illusion versus truth, right? And these two planets are going to be the stars, but not just for the next, 36 years, but especially for the entire year of 2026 because of the position of the 0 degrees in Aries. Now, Saturn in ancient astrology was actually known as the outermost known planet, the farthest visible wandering star, because it moved the slowest and it really symbolizes the edge of the known world and the danger of what actually lies beyond it. So the link to Saturn's symbolism is really understanding the fear, danger of sailing into the unknown, which is part of why Saturn is considered a malefic planet, which a lot of people can see as evil or dark. But to me, especially because I'm a Capricorn, Saturn has been my biggest teacher. Saturn burns karma. Saturn is the father of time, which, interestingly enough, the planet in itself is now, you can see it, astronomers can see that it's actually losing its rings around it. And if it governed time and the way we relate to time, the way you and I as human beings will relate to time will completely change, especially now that we're stepping into the 0 degrees of Aries with Neptune involved. Now, Neptune was actually discovered in 1846. I didn't even know that myself. I thought it was discovered way long ago. So for about 80 years, Neptune has become this new outer edge of the known solar system. And they connect Neptune a lot to illusion and delusion, imagination, ideals, dissolution, integration, washing away these Saturnian structures. So, Neptune, think of it as like becoming the destroyer of the borders, where it's literally loosening the container that Saturn has built. So, the cool thing about this is that when Saturn and Neptune combine, they create this intangible container that frame the entire reality of humanity. And this is what I'm referring to is like language, time systems, like I was talking about, ideologies. When they conjunct, there's a refreshment, there's like a birthing, there's a beginning of brand new themes related to those planets that we haven't seen for 36 years because this is a brand new transit of Saturn into Neptune as it was leaving actually Saturn in Pisces. And Saturn in Pisces was a very interesting time because it was a time of mass spiritual awakening. So now Saturn and Neptune, it's a bit of a, even though Neptune and Pisces are very similar in energy and frequency, they're not exactly the same. So this is going to bring a brand new birthing, a new flavor. And the thing about the conjunction is that what it really is pointing to is that humanity is on this major frontier, an adventure, especially through information technology, virtual worlds, and the metaverse. Remember, we're also now in the age of Aquarius. Pluto was in Capricorn from 2008 until this year. And now Pluto is in Aquarius. And Pluto is a great destroyer. And in Aquarius, it really does mark the futuristic technology area that we've all entered to, but it also marks an era of community, of power to the people, which is why we're seeing a lot of these big empires. This is becoming their demise, right? Because they're working against the energies of what is changing spiritually, consciously, energetically in a human being. So we're going through like the United States of America is going through its Pluto return, which is something that only happens every 243 years. So we can equate it to like an organization going through this or a company or a country because a country has its own astrological chart. And when a country goes through its Pluto return, it's a collapse and a complete rebuilding. And so we're literally seeing that. Think about like the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire went through its Pluto return, it collapsed, but then it rebranded as the Roman Catholic Church. So we have to be very careful of what we are seeing happening right now because I'm seeing the same things happening. This rebrand into the evangelical Christianity, which is not working because in the age of Aquarius, and especially because Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries, people can call out lies and discern. And we have to be honest that, first of all, Jesus Christ did not create religion or Christianity. Paul created Christianity, and he wasn't even a disciple of Jesus Christ. To me, he was a Roman Empire spy who basically created the religion to control people. And that false narrative and mask is coming to the light now where people are calling the BS where the BS is because a lot of these very religious people, they're not following the teachings of Jesus Christ. They're following Paul's teachings, which I did a whole podcast that goes out on that and the Kundalini energy if you want to go check it out. So we are entering into the birth of an entirely brand new era. And what that means is that Saturn is the part of reality that holds, the shape, the rules, the limits, the form, the responsibility. Neptune is spirit, it's ideals, it's the imagination, but it can also be the illusion and what actually dissolves these boundaries. Now, here's the thing, being the sentinels of reality, what this means or that the outer edges of what's unknown. We've never experienced this type of energy, right? So this is going to help us refresh in what humans treat as real. And think about AI and what's happening with that. It's pretty crazy how nowadays and there's no laws, yes, which to me that really confuses me how there's no laws to like protect the privacy and what's being created through AI because it's kind of wild if you think about it. Like these technologies can literally read your brain. There should be laws, and there are some countries that I hear have actually put laws against the ability for social media to read your brain because what it's doing is it's reading your subconscious mind and then it's creating content that's going to trigger you or going to trigger that cortisol and get you back onto the app, right? That should be illegal. Nobody should be allowed to read your subconscious mind. And that's why we have to we it's hard for us to discern if this video is actually made by a real human being or not because it's very difficult now. Now I am a real human being. This is my skin. And I hope that you all are humans out there. But you gotta agree that it's very difficult nowadays to figure if this is actually a human or and a lot of people don't understand that it's used for propaganda. and that they're just trying to put a narrative in your story in your head based on what your fears are, what your triggers are. It's insane. So we're entering into this new era where all of these false containers are basically being built, and it is very much more difficult to actually be able to discern what is false from what is truth. And this has everything to do with Saturn and Neptune, but because it's coming at 0 degrees of Aries, it's something that will completely change humanity forever. Now, before I get into the 0 degrees of Aries and why that's important, let's look at some historical times where Saturn and Neptune have come conjunct in Aries, and not at the 0 degrees, but by looking at the other degrees of when this happened, where we can actually track it back to history, we can really look at some themes as to what this will possibly look like for us this time around at 0 degrees. Now, going back to the very closest time where we can get it as close to 0 degrees, we have to go back all the way to March 593 BCE when Saturn came conjunct Neptune at 2 degrees of Aries. Now, during that time, we had the great empire of the Babylon, Egypt. We had these organizing laws that were created by Judah. We had calendars that were created and temples. This was at 2 degrees of Aries. The prophets Ezekiel, Jeremiah were around during that time, and faith became part of your lived life. It wasn't just a ritual, it was something that now started to become mainstream in essence. We had Greek philosophers when Saturn was conjunct Neptune at 2 degrees, like Pythagoras, who was a huge early thinker. And he was always looking for cosmic order and the meaning of life. So the themes when Saturn and Neptune were 2 degrees of Aries were there was this effort to codify the sacred. Spirituality was translated into like law and scripture and architecture. And there was this bridge that was being built between heaven and earth. Now we go back to April in 91 BCE, where Aries was at 27 degrees of Saturn and Neptune in the conjunction. And during this time, this is where Rome began to crack internally. There was social war in the Roman Empire. There were questions of who deserved inclusion. There was the spread of mysterious religions like Isis and Dionysus. The theme in April 91 BCE, 27 degrees of Aries, shift from ritual duty to personal emotional relationship with God. Notice some of the similarities right now? There was this early emergence of individual spiritual path. There was faith that was breaking out all these crazy rigid systems. Now we go back to March in 232 CE, where Saturn Neptune came conjunct, but at 16 degrees of Aries. What was going on in civilization? The Roman Empire was still very large, but it was very spiritually hollow. There was a rise of Persian religions. There was this talk about the light and the darkness, the duality. And that's when the expansion of early Christianity actually began. So the theme was about divine within the human form, more similarities. Spirit must be lived, not preached, similar to what we're going through right now. Reality cannot hold unless it serves the soul. The big awakening that many of us are actually going through the second coming of Christ. Now, let's go back to March of 555 CE when Saturn and Neptune came conjunct Aries at 7 degrees. What was going on in civilization during that time? That was the fall of Western Rome. There was also creation of the civil law codes. There was construction of Hagia Sophia. So, what were the themes? They marked heaven visible on earth. The kingdom of heaven is within you, Jesus Christ said. Preservation of spiritual knowledge was a huge deal back then. And spirit contained in architecture, in law, and manuscripts. That's how it actually embodied and showed up. Now, going back to March 21st, 1380 CE, Saturn came conjunct Neptune at 21 degrees of Aries. Now, this in civilization, this was the post Black Death of Europe. There was a widespread questioning of institutional religion during this time. Mystic teachings spread about this inner experience of God. So, what was the theme? Trusting a direct personal experience over authority. Same thing what we're going through right now. Seeds of the Renaissance and Reformation. Art, science, and spirituality actually were preparing to break all these old forms and be rebirthed into this Renaissance. And then we go back to March in 1703 CE, where Saturn and Neptune were conjunct Aries at 11 degrees. What was going on there? And oh my gosh, the dawn of enlightenment. Isaac Newton, microscopes, telescopes, science mapping the unseen. What was going on? Measurement of mystery, logic plus spirituality evolving together. I have said so many times that in the next 10 years, science and spirituality will have merged. Why? Because science is just the demystification of the spiritual. What is real is a spiritual world. And so many countries throughout the world honor this and have never left this knowing. It's Western society, United States, that make that woo, make that the unreal, which is why so many people will struggle with what is illusion versus what is real. So the theme during that time was all about building a world that works and has a soul. Now let's go to what is happening on February 20th, 2026, where Saturn and Neptune will come conjunct, but at 0 degrees of Aries. And this is the most potent reset of them all. Have you noticed the themes from all the things that were happening? Every time Saturn and Neptune can conjunct Aries at different degrees, what's different this time is that this is occurring at the absolute beginning of the zodiac. And here we are in the world of now artificial intelligence, virtual reality, digital identities, and Pluto in Aquarius, the age of Aquarius. Whole different flavor, similar themes, right? This is the line between real versus unreal, deeply blurred. Now, 0 degrees of Aries is the beginning point. It's the first point of the zodiac. It's associated with the return of the light. To me, that's very much connected to what it means the second coming of Christ, not outside of you, not as Jesus Christ ascending from the heavens. And people like to argue with me about this, especially from scripture. But what Christ said is, you will go do bigger things than I have ever done. It's you remembering that the light is within you, that you are the Christ light, that you will go do bigger things than Christ has ever done. So this is, and think about even Aries, it's like the start of the spring. It's in many societies, it's the start of the year. For as a Kundalini yoga therapist, that's the beginning of the year for me. Spring equinox, Aries season, not wintertime where we are closing out or we're still moving through winter solstice. So this is referencing ancient astrologers using this first point, Aries, and especially 0 degrees, as a marker of renewal, of reality beginning anew. So when Saturn and Neptune are meeting there, what is it telling us? The edges of reality are being redrawn. There's new borders, new boundaries. You can see all these things that are happening, even with immigration and things of that nature. And more than anything about the constraint, I think that there's also people moving to new countries and not having the borders that maybe constrained the ancestors at one point. And as a cycle breaker, it's so important because when the borders shift in the world, you have to understand your own personal borders as well. Now, I'm not talking about like walls, I'm talking about these inner boundaries. And again, if you've listened to any of my podcast episodes and you understand from a Christ consciousness that we don't set boundaries to protect ourselves. When you have a regulated nervous system through Kundalini Yoga meditation and through spiritual psychotherapy of A Course in Miracles, you don't need protection. You feel safe in your body. You are using Kundalini Yoga meditation to align with God again within you because the brain doesn't produce consciousness, it downloads it. But most of our brains are downloading from a program. So when you reclaim your sovereignty by rebuilding that inner temple, then you'll have beautiful discernment. You'll be able to set boundaries not because you feel protected. That's not what Jesus Christ did. Jesus Christ said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And he meant that because he wasn't taking it personal. He knew that these people that were doing this to him were crying out for help. And what liberated us is him showing us that that's in us too. And it's not about spiritual bypassing or being a pushover, it's about discernment. And when we can set these boundaries because we know that person needs to be protected from themselves, not from us, not only will they not be broken again ever in our life, but we'll be able to really use discernment. Discernment to me is a regulated nervous system. When it's not hijacked by cortisol and adrenaline because of chronic stress, then you can very much discern what is real from what is not. Not only that, but you also have healed the relationship with God within you. So whenever you need clarity, you can talk to God from within you and ask for discernment. And most people, because of trauma, their nervous systems are hijacked with adrenaline, cortisol, brains are hijacked. So what happens is that they actually are most of the time angry at God, but unwilling to admit it. When you've been through patterns of generational trauma, it's an unconscious belief system that you believe God is separate from you because of what religion has told you, but also because there is this valid anger within you of like, well, where were you, God, when I needed you? Where were you when I needed you through this grief, when I needed you to save this person, when I needed you to heal me, when I needed you all these. So it's a valid, we incarnate into these bodies as patients. That's what A Course in Miracles, Jesus Christ says in A Course in Miracles. Why? Because you wouldn't incarnate here anymore if there was not something that would need to be brought from the darkness to the light. And it's not God punishing you, it's that this school whole life is a university. And we're here to pass the curriculum just the way Jesus Christ passed the curriculum. So if you don't have this inner sanctuary where your biophysically your nervous system is regulated and your brain is rewired from trauma, and spiritually where you have literally accepted the atonement, which is what we're going to talk about today, that you are the Christ within you, then it's going to be very difficult for you to tell what is real from what is false. And it's going to be very easy for this outer world to continue to manipulate you. And this is the reason why I'm doing this podcast episode, is because I'm already seeing this happen when we have humanity go through big, massive changes like we're seeing here. The rebrands target people that have gone through trauma at an even higher level because it's easier to basically put them in these relationships of toxicity that will program them deeper into this illusion that they're separate from God. So rebuilding this intersection is key, especially because of this transit. It's like urgent, like the pressure cooker is here. And I'm going to go into some solutions, obviously, but at 0 degrees, Saturn and Neptune, I mean, this is the anchor point. 6,000 years ago is when we can find the closest time when this actually happened. This is the beginning of time. Kundalini Yoga is not a religion. It was created, it was developed before religions. And it was 6,000 years ago, marking the beginning of consciousness for humanity. For example, in 4361 BC, Saturn and Neptune conjoin at 0 degrees Aries, right almost at the 1 degree, 0 degree and 1 minute. And the further we go back, the less certain historical reconstruction is, because, as you know, we might not have the records, right? But like, think about this. 4361 BC was the closest time that you can get to the 0 degrees. That's huge. What was going on during that time? That was the beginning of time. Again, not a coincidence that Saturn's rings are disappearing. The calendars were created. Assyrian calendar actually started at the starting point was placed in the 5th millennium BC, right when Saturn and Neptune were conjunct at 0 degrees. The Egyptian calendar and anchored in that era as well. So this was the biblical creation era, referenced as another attempt to locate when time actually began. We had language that was developed during this time when Saturn and Neptune came 0 degrees of Aries. Proto-Indo-European language that dated to around 4500 BC. There was also languages that later emerged from this family: Spanish, English, Portuguese, Russian, Persian. So language in itself was developed. Like that just gives me chills. Why? Because imagine how much humanity is going to change this time around. So what were they building during that time? Saturn, father time, father of karma. Karma's not good or bad. From an action, there's a effect, period. And Neptune, collective meaning. And then 0 degrees of Aries, the start. So what does this mean? This is aligning with civilizations, naming this the beginning of time. We're stepping into the beginning of time for humanity on February 20th, 2026. And the 6,000 year anchor point, my God, it is where civilizations were born and created. When time was created, the way we relate to time, think about technology like omnipresence, astral projection, our ability to be able to travel interdimensionally was something that was very common for our ancestors. For us, it's woo woo, new age, only certain people can do it. But the way we relate to time is going to collapse, whether the powers that be want to or not. We are remembering our power. We are remembering that there is no separation between us and God. So you better believe the way we experience life is going to change. Now, there's also a lot of manipulation with this, right? Because the more that they can keep you under a state of illusion of believing that the human race is inherently guilty or sick and evil and making you believe that this there's no hope for humanity is exactly what they want you to believe because that's what's creating the new earth. But the truth is that our ancestors also talked about the golden age of consciousness. Whether you look at it from a Mayan perspective, a Mexica, the Hindu, they're all talking about this time of consciousness that we are literally rebuilding, which is why everything that doesn't align with that truth, with our connection back to Mother Earth, is literally being apocalypsed. And what is the root word of apocalypse? It's revelation. Revelation. Your energy speaks louder than words. You can no longer wear this mask and not be called out for it. So Saturn and Neptune is changing at 0 degrees of Aries. It's completely changing humanity. How time is tracked, how language is shared, how the sacred is experienced, how the unseen becomes something you live. And that's exactly spirit becoming form. Why we're also interested and remembering how important the spiritual world actually is, where inner faith becomes a lived experience, where direct access to God replaces external authority, whether you're talking about a guru, a church, or anything in the middle. And 2026 is this new terrain. It's not the outer temples, it's not the outer cathedrals, or although going back into community setting is going to be crucial, but it's about the inner temple that you're rebuilding because if you don't feel safe in your body because your nervous system and brain are hijacked due to chronic stress and trauma, then your outer world is going to reflect that. And so we first have to really think about how this is showing up in 2026 and beyond, whether it's through social media, like I said, laws that might have to be implemented, that I hope are implemented in this country as well, about social media and technology being able to read your subconscious mind and use that against you. Wild. Virtual reality, artificial intelligence, which I think we're definitely seeing a huge bubble because artificial intelligence, they try to sell it to us like it's smarter than a human being. You are the most advanced technology. Kundalini yoga allows you to awaken fifth state of matter, Kundalini, that lives within you. Not just to heal and change your patterns of ancestral trauma, but it's to reveal you. This body, mind, spirit, the brain, and the nervous system are the most advanced technologies that can create anything in this world with God. But we were never taught how to use them. And they've been trying to sell us this story that artificial intelligence is one point going to be smarter than us. It needs us to function. It will never be able to function on itself. And if we actually turn the ship around and we all start to truly go within to the inner temple and we practice Kundalini Yoga meditation, the reality and the truth is that you will develop your gifts instead of living in trauma, and you will understand that you are the most advanced technology. So we're looking at these lines between the real and the unreal, which is becoming very blurry if you don't know who you are. And if you continue to trauma bond, which is what we're going to talk about today, we can create entire worlds just from our visions, our belief, our imagination. But what we're really being asked for in this age of Aquarius and this, especially after this transit, is ethics. Ethics. If everybody could see everything you're doing and saying, would you still do and say what you're saying and doing? The spiritual task is now to ground this expansion and collective consciousness awakening into something authentic for you, who you are, connected with God, with the divine. And just as temples have been physical meeting grounds for faith, digital temples like the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary, digital sanctuaries will become the modern day sanctuaries. It's a gift for us to be able to come together as women in sisterhood from all over the nation. We wouldn't be able to do that without the virtual world. So it's about using it for the highest good, not to program others into again giving away their power, which is what religion, the government, and healthcare systems have always done, and schools. Schools is one big propaganda, whether you're talking about elementary, middle, high school, and especially college. You're not raising your kids. The government is, the program is. I mean, even if you go look at all the books that have been published for the schools, they're published by one publisher who's connected to some really shady, horrific things because there's a narrative that they want you to believe. And when you are not sovereign and you've been through a lot of trauma, you won't even be able to tell what propaganda is and what it isn't. You'll just accept it as the truth. But many of us are awakening. And this is not for you to be afraid, just for you to feel empowered to know that you can discern and that you can be authentically you, that you can be connected to God consistently, and that you can live a life without wearing a mask of ethics, of integrity, of character, of understanding that what you give to others is what you're giving to yourself. And we don't do that because of trauma. So, connection with these virtual sanctuaries is going to be huge across time and space. And that is what is true because think about it. When I think about the virtual Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary, it's a container. It's a container for the truth. It's a container for the sacred. It's a container for your inner rebuilding of that temple where you can feel safe doing so. And Saturn is the builder of containers. Neptune is the spirit that fills them or dissolves them if they're false. That's why the rose-colored glasses are coming off, especially with Saturn here hanging out with us. So in this era, the question isn't, will virtual sanctuaries exist? They already do. Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary. The question is, what kind of sanctuary are you rebuilding from inside of you? And that's where trauma bonding comes through. And it becomes a crisis. And it feels like safety, but it's actually dependence. And this is what I need you to understand. Because from February 20th, 2026, these lines will be blurred. And if you are not sovereign enough to understand where you might be trauma bonding, then it will take you deeper into that traumatic experience and into the old ways of being of martyrism and thinking that suffering for some reason is spiritual. Well, that's because governments who created religion made it that way. Yeah, the poor, they gotta suffer, and God needs you to suffer. But us, the rich, we're good, right? So let's talk about trauma bonding because this is something that we do not do in the Sovereign Sisterhood movement or inside of our community, the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary. And by hearing this, you might be triggered. And if you're triggered, you might still need dependency on someone else. And that's exactly what we're throwing out the door. You're learning to heal yourself, no gatekeeping. The meaning of a true teacher is one that will make better teachers out of their students, not one who keeps. Just like Jesus Christ did not gatekeep. Paul did, not Jesus Christ, though. So, in order for us to understand this and to better use our discernment in the age of Aquarius, and as we move into Saturn, Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries in February 20th of 2026, let's first define trauma bonding clearly. Trauma bonding is connection built through the nervous system, believe it or not. And it's built through the nervous system activation. And then it's goes into relief and then activation again. And that's what gets very, very addicting. It's not two people who have trauma, it's a specific attachment pattern. So in simple science, when you are in threat, your body releases stress chemistry. And when the threat lifts, your body then feels all this relief, right? But if the same person or the same community causes fear and then offers you comfort, your brain starts pairing them with survival. So this is what a lot of religions, a lot of churches do, right? The same community, they'll cause fear. You're a sinner, you're a sinner, you're a sinner. But then we offer you the comfort of as long as not that you act like Jesus Christ, but that you believe in Jesus Christ, you're going to be saved. So your brain then starts pairing that with survival. And it becomes this like pattern of fear, relief, attachment, fear, relief, attachment, fear, relief, attachment. And this is the way religious organizations control people. This is the way all types of organizations, governments, it's this whole you need me to experience God. And I've seen like these organizations, political organizations that are now masking themselves as religious organizations. I've seen them do this very clearly where they tell the people, they go after specific people that have been through trauma, that are trying to find out who they are, their identity because of the trauma. And then they'll say things like, as long as you're part of our community, you're going to be strong and connected. So it's not you are strong and connected through you. I'm teaching you how to become strong and connected yourself. It's no, in order for you to be powerful or strong, you have to go through us. These are political organizations masking themselves as religious organizations that I see them doing right now. And that's why I'm bringing this up right now because what is truth from what is false? Are you paying attention? Meditation this whole world is a trance. You meditate, you put yourself in your own trance. Hopefully, that's the God trance. If you don't meditate, they're putting you in their trance, and you can't even tell. The real wisdom or the real truth is what the person is saying in between the gap. In the gap is what I call it. Between what they're saying now and what they're gonna say next. Most people don't even pay attention to that because their nervous systems have lived under chronic stress because of trauma, life, right? And they cannot even listen in that way. Communication is not what you say, it's actually how good of a listener you are. Because if you can listen, you can tell what that person is really saying in between the next word that the person chooses and the word that the person chooses. And so most of us, we miss that. And people, especially if they're manipulating you or trying to, like religion has done many times, it's like they put the words in a specific order so that they can put you in this cycle of fear, relief, attachment. It's actually known as neurolinguistics. Again, so many things can be used for the good, neurolinguistics, maybe to help you get out of trauma, right? But they also are used for the bad, to control, sadly, right? So that cycle, it creates this bond that feels intense. It feels spiritual. It almost feels even faith. And remember, if they can read your subconscious mind through technology, and then all of a sudden you see somebody speaking to you about that on the algorithm, and you don't even know if that person is actual real or not. That person is now playing on your fears. It feels like, oh my God, this is a fated event. This is exactly who I need to be talking to. Is that the truth, or are they just playing on your fears? With talking about generational trauma so much, my whole messaging of 2026, I'm not even going to use it. It's always just what does it look like now that you're a healed ancestor, that you're a healed sovereign woman? I want to show you what it feels like where God is embodied through you, where you are connected to God. I want to show you what the nervous system feels like. We've learned enough already of what trauma causes us in our body. And the things that I'm going to be sharing with you, they still might trigger you. Why? Well, first of all, that's my job as a Kundalini yoga therapist because I'm telling you things that you know are the truth, but that your soul hasn't accepted or that you haven't taken action upon. So that's why it's really triggering. And then I trigger people a lot because I'm not here to be a savior or a guru. And a lot of people that have been through trauma, that's what they want. They want someone to heal them. They want someone to be their savior and their guru. And I don't do that. I teach you how to do this for yourself because you can. And whatever you admire in me, it's in you. Whatever you hate in me, it's also in you too. So that's why I don't care if people like me or hate me because it's always a reflection of them, not of me. And so if we don't have this nervous system regulation and brain rewiring and this knowing of who we truly are, we're going to need someone outside of us to come rescue us. And this is not a fated event, it's chemistry. They're playing on your cortisol, they're playing on your adrenaline. And even with the videos that I share of, like, look at the videos we just did for the 10 body systems. It wasn't just, here's what's wrong, you're broken forever. Not at all. Here's the root cause, here's the solutions. You're actually not broken. And none of the things that you think are disorders actually exist. It's just a dysregulated moment. Way different messaging, right? And we're going to get into even this is exactly how Jesus Christ taught, right? So it's chemistry. You're constantly online, you're part of a community of a church that constantly gets your cortisol really high and adrenaline, and then you feel like you have to go back there in order for it to be reduced, and you can't do it on your own. And think about that. Trauma bonding happens a lot in healing spaces because when we need healing, we're at our most vulnerable stage. That's so sad. That type of abuse of spiritual, the type of karma that comes from spiritual abuse or abuse with the most vulnerable is the type of karma that comes back to you and your lineage in such a scary way. Like it feels like a curse. But it's because these people have absolutely abused their spiritual power. And we're going to see more charlatans and we're going to see all these other, you need to run away far if anybody tells you that they're here to awaken your Kundalini. First of all, you don't set a goal for that. And second of all, nobody can do that for you. You have to do that for yourself. And it's not something that you again create even an intention. You do your practice and you allow the natural folding of your life to occur, sometimes in a very fast way, right? And in trauma bonding, it feels like, especially when you're in a healing space, people they just share their raw pain over and over and over and over. The brain doesn't know the difference between an actual experience and a perceived experience. So there goes your cortisol, there goes your adrenaline, right? What happens also is like the group begins to reward like exposure, like the person will say something and then all of a sudden everyone starts feeling sorry for that person. That's not empowering. That's now, if you feel sorry for someone, it's because you haven't had the capacity to deal with your own pain. True compassion is having compassion for that human being without taking on their pain. And in order for you to have true compassion, you have to have a rewired nervous system and brain because your prefrontal cortex becomes damaged through trauma and chronic stress, right? So then that's why people are like, oh, now that person is sick and I made it about myself. Now you're gonna get sick too because of those thoughts, and you're not helping that person by feeling sorry for them. You are re-identifying them to that illusion of what they don't want to be identified to. They come to you to share their issues so that they could be seen as whole and complete, not even though you think that they want to be felt sorry for. That's what the ego is saying, but at their core, what liberates someone else is you seeing them as whole and complete, regardless of what they're moving through in life. But we can't do that when we have an unstable nervous system. So then we get into these trauma bonds of like, oh, I feel so bad for you. And then we tell ourselves really toxic things like, well, look at her problem. Hers is worse than mine. Mine is not that bad. That's horrific because this community reward system of you went through it worse than I did is only putting that person back into that identity, which is not who they are. The other thing about these trauma bonds that happen, especially in these healing spaces, is that intensity becomes like proof of growth. Like the more pain you go through, it's like this whole martyr mentality. And then also the leader, my God, becomes the only emotional regulator and everything. And she has to be at her core. Make sure that the leader doesn't have any darkness or light, and the leader is not real or authentic. She just is perfect, and I have to somehow one day be like her. Like that is not a real teacher. A real teacher, especially as we know it in Kundalini yoga and from Jesus Christ's perspective, makes better their students better teachers than her. That's what Jesus Christ said. You will go do bigger things than I have ever done. No gatekeeping there. And then relief comes from the leader rather than from an internal safety that has been built or from the community. And I'm not saying in our community we have prayer requests. We have done healing circles for women that have gone through miscarriages. That's supportive sisterhood that was asked, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is all of a sudden you constantly need this like you you feel that you cannot feel safety without the community, and you're constantly using that as a place to basically trauma dump and to then for others then to be like, yes, yes, let me fix her, let me change the way she's feeling instead of let me empower her so she could realize how powerful she is and that what she's seeking is actually seeking her and it's within. Very big difference because the latter creates a lot of dependency. All these things I just mentioned to you, so much codependency. And dependency disguises itself as devotion, sadly, especially in healing communities. And the key link to the consciousness shift that we're entering because of this age of Aquarius and February 20th, 2026, is that basically reality with it blurring, the new worlds are not being built in code of consciousness, and then we have a hunger for meaning that is still present, which will cause us to seek out these communities and seek out these answers, but where we have to learn to use discernment. And a lot of women also stay away from spiritual communities because they've been burnt by them. But not all communities are built equally. And in fact, today I'm gonna hopefully this is helping you to be able to discern a true leader, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, from a false one. A true community that is there to help you reclaim your sovereignty to grow versus one that is going to basically trauma bond you and make you feel worse than ever, right? So in a world where reality is hard to trust, people they want certainty as their container. They do want leadership. They want systems. They want to know their identity. They want to be part of community. They want it to be simple. But when people are unstable in their nervous system, they're easier to influence, which is, I mean, think about everything that happened in the pandemic, 2020. People are still recovering from trauma from then and grief, plus the pileup of all the things that they've gone through as children and ancestrally. And then all of a sudden, It just recently, it was until really Dr. Gabor Mate, who's trauma informed, started going more mainstream, that many of us even correlated our physical illness, spiritual illness, mental illness with the connection to how we were raised and ancestral trauma. So it's like now, like, it feels almost like the shit hit the fan, and people are like, oh my God, there is so much that I need to heal from. And that's why, because like shit has hit the fan, the truth has been revealed. Apocalypse, what's at the root word of apocalypse? Revelation. Revelation. This is when humanity also becomes easier to influence. This is what was happening in the Roman Catholic Empire. When it collapsed, it crucified Jesus Christ. People were distraught. They were horrified. They were grieving. They were looking for someone to lead them. They were seeking faith. So why it was so easy to corrupt them and to convert them into the Catholic religion, which became the Roman Catholic Empire, right? Why? Because they were at their weakest, they were at their lowest, and that's what humanity is going through right now. I don't want to say we're at our weakest, but we are in this pivotal time where everything has changed and where cognitive dissonance is real, where we ourselves are trying to ground ourselves in our body to say, well, what is the truth and what is false? And because that can be very overwhelming, especially if you've been through trauma, that's what puts you in a very vulnerable state to be programmed back into these religious ways of God is outside of you, you are a sinner, suffering is spiritual, and you need to outsource your safety to a government, to an outside entity to heal you or to bring peace to you. And that's why traumatized nervous systems, especially first time cycle breakers, are the most likely to be pulled into these guru dynamics, into these trauma bonding communities, into these communities where spiritual bypass is normal because it looks holy. Like, oh, I forgive him or I forgive her, and I'm not validating any of my emotions, or I'm not understanding that I sometimes I need to set boundaries to protect that person from themselves and not from me. Like that's all BS. And it's all BS because we're also taught to like surrender, but we're not really taught how to do that and what it means biophysically, energetically. And the way we're being taught right now, it's a form of submission. It's a form of you have to give up something in order for God, like you're negotiating with God. And when God doesn't negotiate, God only sees truth and wholeness in you. So surrendering is not submission. Surrendering is accepting your power, your truth, and that God actually moves through you. And it's not submissive to a angry God. It's acceptance of the powerful God that moves through, that wants to express herself through you. Big difference here, right? So the collective responsibility question becomes very personal if you think about it. Is what I'm participating in building my inner authority the truth, or is it replacing the truth? Because this new era with the age of Aquarius and with Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries, anything can become a sanctuary if you think about it. But not everything is sacred, my friend. Sacred is to make something sacred is to make it through and see it through the vision of God. It's not to give up something. Sometimes connected to sacrifice. Sacrifice is to make something sacred, to make yourself sacred, not to give up who you are, who you were. It's to accept yourself in your totality because God does not judge. And some spaces are just well-defined codependency spaces, trauma bonding, where again, the message is not, you got this, you're powerful, let me show you how. It's, you need me, or else you will not be powerful, or else you will go to hell, or else all these other crazy things will happen. Now, this is where the mission of the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary comes in a big way. And I was called to create the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary way back in 2018. I was using the word sovereignty before the pandemic hit, and then it started to become a very huge buzzword. And I don't want to say I because it was God. God was guiding me. God said, you need to leave your position as a real estate broker for 15 years, and this is the work that you're here to do, which is a vision that I've had since like 2008, but it didn't quantify itself until I did my own healing journey. And I actually I became a Kundalini yoga teacher and now finishing my degree as a Kundalini yoga therapist. But the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary exists because first time generational cycle breakers, they need something different than this trauma bonding. We don't need another trauma space. We don't need another tell your story space. We don't need another leader centered guru space. We need a place where the sacred becomes livable again in your everyday life without any one of us losing discernment. We need to be able to trust our gifts and trust God moving through us. We need to a place where the sacred is becomes livable where we train nervous system safety, brain rewiring, clear perception, not perceptions that come from religious programming or trauma bonding or trauma programming. We need devotion to God without dependency. We need to learn to surrender to God without submission to other people outside of ourselves. And that's why this is a virtual sanctuary, a sanctuary without walls, because the world is moving into digital sacred spaces, whether we like it or not. So the question then becomes, are these spaces going to be built on manipulation or on sovereignty? Now, where does generational healing belong? That's the question. And generational healing is not an identity that we cling to in the sanctuary. Generational healing is the outcome of a woman becoming safe enough to choose differently. Because what gets passed down is not just like a story, it's a state of consciousness, it's a state of the nervous system, it's a state of the brain. And we know that hypervigilance gets passed down. When we're hypervigilant and our brain is constantly looking out for the next shoe to drop because we've lived under chaos all of our life. But hypervigilance is also a brain that can be very psychic and that we can use those gifts for the light as well. We don't want to keep passing down shutdown and scarcity and the silence that comes with generational trauma. When we train our nervous system and our brain and rebuild this inner sanctuary, we stop transmitting survival as normal and we stop trauma bonding. We don't need that activation and that kick. We've developed a way to heal ourselves. And that's why I call this the highest form of activism, generational healing, because you're not healing to just feel better. Oh my God, all love and light. You're healing so that the pattern never continues again. And ultimately, it's so that you can rebuild the temple to experience God within you. And so you can stop the reincarnation loop, which is a form of slavery. Jesus Christ showed us the way. I'm going to explain that to you here next through true perception and our ability to attain peace in these bodies, to do the same thing he did. He didn't have to keep reincarnating because he was able to be on that cross and say, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." That's why you're here as a soul. Why are you putting it off? Why are you saying no to tools like Kundalini Yoga therapy and A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy, which bring you back home? You have to be willing to heal. And it's not about doing the work, it's about just simply being willing. When you are willing, the teacher shows up. God comes through in a big way. And that's when the changes actually start to occur. That's where the miracle starts to happen. Your willingness, the outer reality changes. And so when we train our nervous system and brain for safety instead of survival, we become activists, the highest form of activist, a bodhisattva. Typical activists, they go through a lot of health problems because they're angry at the world and they're stuck to an attachment of an outcome, meaning I have to fix the world. As a cycle breaker, it's so important that you understand that you're not here to fix yourself or fix the world or fix your lineage. A bodhisattva is one that can work through life in compassion, showing up in compassion without attachment to the outcome, without feeling that it's her job to change or save the world. Look, it only requires one person to accept the atonement for the world to be changed. So if you want to change the world, you got to heal yourself. And that's how you heal 7 generations before and after you. But if you make it a focus of like, I'm doing this because I'm doing it even for my children, I'm doing it That's like a byproduct, right? But you should want to heal yourself and awaken yourself and realize who you are for you, because that's why your soul incarnated. And that's what you get to leave as a legacy. So, what this means is that there is no trauma bonding as a first time generational cycle breaker in the Sovereign Sisterhood movement. We do not build closeness through shared wounds. We do not reward emotional exposure as belonging. We do not use intensity of the pain you're going through as proof of transformation. We do not make me or any teacher the regulator of your nervous system. We do build devotion. And what this means is that we train safety through trauma-informed Kundalini Yoga therapy. We correct perception through A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy. We practice surrender to God moving through you. So your inner temple and authority strengthens. We call this Saibon in Kundalini Yoga. So in this sanctuary, the Sovereign Sisterhood movement, the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary, God, highest power, call it what you will, is the authority. It's not me. It's not even the group. It's not the ancestral tarot reading that I do every week on Monday. It's not even the internet. And this is the difference between a trauma space and a sovereign sanctuary. One is going to bond you through pain, and one is going to allow you to accept peace again as the normal frequency and vibration in your lineage. Now, we are all made to awaken the Christ consciousness within us, but we reject that because of generational trauma patterns and the impact that it does to our brain and our nervous system. And then we become vulnerable to being programmed into religion or these spaces that, instead of showing us how to fish, think that by fishing for us, they can keep us in these toxic bonds that will keep you coming back. But from A Course in Miracles perspective, Jesus Christ talks about how it is your birthright, and it wasn't just in A Course in Miracles, it was also in scripture, to accept what is known as true perception and the attainment of peace, which I want to break down today. The attainment of peace is something that we worked through this month inside of the community, the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary. My sister Lizzie, who teaches A Course in Miracles in our community every week, it was very important for us to work through this attainment of peace during a month that we were creating generational wealth, which ultimately generational wealth is a regulated nervous system. And I'll have to do a different podcast episode just for that. Which, by the way, if this podcast episode is resonating, hit that like button, drop a heart below, leave me some comments. We'd love to dialogue back and forth with how this is resonating and landing for you. But in essence, true perception, which is what I want to talk about today, is something that has to be developed. It's a muscle, right? It's repetition. In Kundalini Yoga, we call this japji. Japji means repetition. You're unwinding and rewiring and patterns of generational trauma, of illusion of separation from God due to religion of hundreds and hundreds and years ago. So even though one meditation and one spiritual psychotherapy, A Course in Miracles class can completely change your entire life, the truth is that there's a lot of repetition that has to occur in order for you to develop new neurons and change the nervous system. But through A Course in Miracles, the reason why Jesus explains that we go into these trauma bonding relationships unconsciously, of course, many of the times, is because we don't accept our power. We're actually really afraid of our power, and we're afraid of the truth of what Christ calls true perception, which is what he calls as Christ's vision. And today I want to give you a small teaching on that that's going to protect your life in this era that we're entering. Because when reality gets harder to trust digitally, culturally, spiritually, there's one thing that becomes priceless, and that is what Jesus calls true perception in A Course in Miracles. And this is what Jesus says is the goal of salvation and of the entire course. And it says you're gonna have to take this course once in your lifetime. So might as well take it now, right? And salvation in itself is not some kind of crazy dramatic moment. Jesus in A Course in Miracles calls it a vision. And he calls it Christ's vision, spiritual sight. And what it really is to me is true perception. So, what is false perception? False perception is not just negative thinking. False perception is the mind looking through fear. And why do we have fear? It's not because of anything outside of here. It's because we have attack thoughts within us. We did a whole teaching on this inside of the community. When you release attack thoughts from inside of you, you will never be afraid again. But the thing is that false perception is the mind looking through fear, looking through attack thoughts within us. And so we look at the world and what do we see? We see threats, we see sins, we see differences, we see hierarchy, we see specialness, we see separation. Your brother, your sister, they're out there. I'm right here. And God, who knows where God is, right? And so because we see this separation, we always need a substitute for safety. There's a gap there, right? So false perception is your programming. And it says, I gotta attach to something. So I need an identity of I'm a mother, I'm a wife. Sometimes it's we're loyal to identities that don't serve us. Like I went through this trauma. I'm a survivor. That's like the worst thing that you can call yourself. Because now your body, first of all, your body, there's Harvard studies of this. How you talk to your body's listening, whether you're saying it out loud or you're just thinking it. Those are neuropeptides, chemicals that are moving into the cells. The cells are listening the entire time, which is why we got to rewire our brain and nervous systems, right? But the false perception is always wanting us to attach to something outside of us, to follow someone. And I'm not saying all of us should have a teacher, but a true teacher, one that teaches us how to be better teachers than them, not a gatekeeping teacher that makes you idolize them or worship them. The false perception also says pick a side. Look at the world, right? Left and right, Republican, Democrat, all these different things. They even do this inside of jails. They separate people. People are separated by their race, by their color of their skin. Why? Because when people pick a side, they're easier to control. Period. Religion does this really well too. A false perception will also tell you to find certainty outside of yourself. Give your authority away so you can actually feel safe, right? And this is where trauma bonding becomes spiritualized. Because when false perception is active, it cannot tell the difference between love and relief. It cannot tell the difference between devotion and dependency. It cannot tell the difference between surrendering to God and submission to a person, to a false God. When true perception is completely different. True perception has to be developed. This is why I'm saying, even if you've been through the worst trauma, that's what A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy is. That is what Kundalini Yoga therapy is. That is the purpose of the sanctuary, of the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary and the Sovereign Sisterhood Movement, to develop true perception so you can attain peace in the body. I'm going to show you how. True perception is the opposite of projection. So projection is basically guilt, sadness, grief, anger, all these emotions that are so heavy for you to feel them that you actually project them out into the world. And you project them because they're intolerable, which creates a lot of drama out here. So now your neighbor's the problem, your partner's the problem, your boss is the problem, your kids are the problem. Why? Because you're projecting out from something that you cannot hold within you because there's shame, guilt, all these other emotions, right? True perception does not look or condemn. That's the false god of the Bible that we've been told about. The demiurge, the the basically the God that we've been programmed to believe is separate from us. And true perception, it does not look and condemn. It just looks and recognizes. That's it. A Course in Miracles, Jesus says, true perception sees everything as truly as it is, innocent, sinless, and holy. And you're going to say, what? What about all those people that hurt me? What about those evil people that are basically causing a lot of harm? We're not bypassing, we're not allowing this to happen. Jesus Christ was not a pushover. He used his sword of truth. But at the core, regardless of what the person was doing, Jesus saw that person as the Christ. Now, he didn't heal everyone, and some people he said you're gonna have to learn through reincarnation, which means you're gonna have to leave this body and do this again because you're not learning, right? But he that's why he was called a heretic. He wasn't a pushover. He went into the churches and turned over the tables of the money makers and said, "You're not supposed to be doing this," right? So that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you don't make what other people do about you. When we have an unstable nervous system, somebody will attack you, betray you, do all these things, right? It's not about you. As much as you want to make it about yourself, it's not because you're unworthy, you deserved it, you attracted it. It's because that person is so broken and unconscious. That's why. And so when we understand that it's not about us, it's called emotional intelligence. And we can even use energy that is very low vibration, very toxic. We can use it to empower ourselves because we don't have energy leaks that are giving that attention anymore. Again, a true sovereign person is one that doesn't get inflated in the ego with all the compliments, but also doesn't get deflated in the ego when somebody says something or doesn't approve of them. So true perception, it just looks in neutrality and makes decisions from that, right? And Course of Miracles, Jesus says that that person, regardless of how evil the act is that they made, at the core, they're still becoming that. They might have to reincarnate a few times, and we might have to use the law or use our sword to protect that person from themselves. But at the core, unless they're like some kind of reptilian and they don't have a soul, which that does exist, they are still the Christ or becoming the Christ. And again, it does not mean the behavior is loving. It means that the essence underneath of the behavior is not condemned. True perception sees basically whatever the person has done as a call for love. This is fear asking to be healed. This is not my enemy. Jesus Christ never saw Judas as his enemy. There's a lost gospel of Judas that basically shows how Jesus Christ asked Judas to betray him because he knew that that would liberate him and everyone in the world. And Judas was like, I don't want to do that, dude. And then he's like, well, but if you're asking me, this is something that is very high spiritual consciousness teaching that I have to figure out how to be part of it. And if I trust you, teacher. And so that's what he did, right? Because Judas was not Jesus Christ's enemy. If Judas would have been his enemy, he wouldn't have been able to do the things he did and be on that cross and say the things he said. True perception also says, this is not my savior. I know that so many people just wanted the easy way out of Jesus Christ is going to come from the heavens somewhere and save all of us, and that's not what's going to happen. The second coming of Christ is about us accepting the Christ within us. Christmas happens every single time you forgive, every single time you're willing to forgive, not even forgive. You're willing to see through the eyes of Christ. God finishes the work. And that's why we can, through true perception, say things like, hey, this is my brother, this is my sister, we're equal. And I know that what I give to her or him is what I'm giving to myself. So if I want to stop giving myself venom, I gotta stop drinking it. And how do I stop drinking it? Well, I gotta focus on what I can control, which is my healing. I can't control that person, right? So the most important part of this is that true perception, it doesn't come from the brain's analysis, because that's a program, it's downloading. It's born as a knowing from Christ in you, from the Christ in you. And that's why it protects you, because it cannot be manipulated by charisma, by urgency, by a room full of activated nervous systems and emotions. True perception is calm. It's not numb, it's not passive. The eyes you see with are basically the eyes of God, the eyes of Christ. We don't see through the body's eyes. The body meaning the identity and mask we've been wearing all of our life. I am this person, I am that person, I am that person. And so true perception is your physical eyes will show you images, forms, and appearances, but true perception sees meaning. It sees the illness as part of the whole. It sees the divorce as part of the whole. Not because I'm spiritual and suffering is spiritual, but because I trust God so much. I trust God within me so much that I can see these things even through the eyes of Christ. So it sees what it's seeing, true perception, but it doesn't make it about themselves. It sees what is actually happening. But in this next era where AI can generate faces, voices, stories, prophecies, and identities, you're going to need a kind of sight that cannot be fake. That's true perception. Because true perception isn't impressed by all the diamonds and all the stuff. It's not seduced, it's not rushed, it listens. It reads the energy and it knows. Now, true perception itself ends trauma bonding because trauma bonding is built on this chemical loop that we were talking about: fear, relief, attachment. It's not love, it's nervous system survival paired with closeness, right? False perception interprets that relief as this is my person. Like, think about it. You always say, I'm never gonna date this kind of man again because this man was exactly my dad or my mom that I've been wanting to avoid all my life, right? But your nervous system, if you don't rewire your nervous system and your brain, your nervous system is going to look at that very toxic person. And because it's familiar, not because it's good for you, because it's familiar for your brain and your nervous system, you're going to say, this is my person. So that's why you're not unlucky and aligning with the same toxic relationships. You're just choosing what's familiar and you're doing it unconsciously. That's false perception. That's why we need spiritual psychotherapy of A Course in Miracles and Kundalini Yoga therapy meditation to change the mind, to bring healing at the level of the body, mind, and spirit. So false perception, you're going to be like, that's my relationship, when it's literally the most toxic relationship that's going to repeat the same thing you went through as childhood. And you're choosing them because now you can play out your childhood wounding. You're also going to say, that's my teacher, because the person is putting you through the loops, right? Of activation, relief, activation, relief, activation, relief. True perception doesn't do that. Relief is not my proof. I can heal myself. I don't need someone to heal me. Intensity is not proof. Just drama, like we cause drama because we're so used to it, our nervous systems. But that's not proof that I'm actually in the right relationship or in the right space or community. Chemistry is not proof. Cortisol, adrenaline. True perception asks one question: does this increase my inner authority or replace it? That's what I want you to start asking. Every time you listen to something, especially if you're being triggered by it, does this increase my inner authority or replace it? So, what I'm saying to you right now, it could be triggering you because you're like, oh man, unconsciously, I can't trauma dump there. She's not going to save me. I got to do this myself. So, you might be triggered, right? But the question to ask yourself is, does this increase my inner authority? Oh shit, it does, what she's saying, or replace it. If the person is saying, you're only going to be strong if you're associated with me, God comes through me to you, I'm the guru, is that replacing your inner authority? The answer is pretty clear there. So, this is what you have to do with all the people that you are getting and consuming information from, those people that you consider your teachers, from the government, from the healthcare system. Is this increasing my inner authority or replacing it? And you're going to have to ask this. Now, with the regulated nervous system and brain through Kundalini Yoga therapy, this is a very natural, quick process. And it might require you practice, but you should never be making a decision without answering this question, especially if the decision is a big decision that's going to alter your life. You need to slow down and ask the real question here. Why? Because Christ does not replace your authority, even. Jesus Christ was not even trying to do that. You will go do bigger things than I have ever done. Jesus Christ restores your vision. That's what A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy, which we teach inside of the sanctuary, is all about. True perception ends trauma bonding because it removes the middleman. It stops making gods out of people and you worshiping them. It's okay for you admire others and be inspired by them because truly what you see in others is inside of you. So that means that there's resonance there because that person is as a reminder of what's inside of you, right? But we don't worship. And not even Jesus Christ wanted to be worshiped or idolized. That's why he didn't create the Christian religion. So true perception stops confusing dependency for devotion, and it returns you to the only authority that is real, God within you. And that's why Jesus Christ was not an idol. He was not someone we're supposed to worship. He was not a gatekeeper. He was a true teacher. And Jesus in itself did not build a movement by making people depend on him. Not at all. He healed, he transcended the body, and he said, go, it's your turn. He said, you can do this too. Scripture says we will do greater works than him. What does that mean? That Jesus was never trying to be worshiped as your replacement. He was restoring what was already inside of you, the Christ, the capacity to see through God's eyes, the capacity to love without fear. So, if any of these healing spaces or communities that are being built in this very vulnerable state of consciousness are training you to believe that you cannot hear God without them, that's not the true God. And that's not Jesus Christ's teachings either, or Krishna. That is dependency wearing spiritual clothing. True perception will show you what that instantly. True perception is going to show you truth immediately. And it's not with paranoia, it's with peace. Because true perception is incarnation, not escaping. And with Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Pisces, or 0 degrees, excuse me, of Aries, the Neptunian energy for those that can't sustain, and it will be so overwhelming, the illusion, it's going to cause a lot of like these rose-colored glasses to come off by force. And true perception is incarnation and being able to be in this bodies, knowing that we are a soul having this human experience, but that we also, because a lot of spiritual people have like this stereotypical inability to ground themselves and to use this incarnation also to serve their soul purpose and to impact the world and however they're being called to do that, right? But that's the whole thing, that true perception is about being able to incarnate into these bodies as souls and not escape. And Neptune can be very much an escapist, especially when it comes to rugs or anything that will numb you. So I want to make this very, very clear. True perception is not about you leaving the body at all. It's not about floating above life and never having an emotion again. It's about your incarnation. It's about Christ's vision entering the body and reinterpreting the world. It's the Holy Spirit taking your daily life, your relationships, your money, your leadership, and cleansing your entire sight. That's what we do with A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy. So beyond like it being a trance, it's a way of living. It sees all things as having one purpose, and that one purpose is forgiveness. And we're gonna do a whole more podcast episodes on just forgiveness because it's so layered. And I've done several here and in my live generational healing sessions on TikTok. But it's not about letting people off the hook. It's about removing the false meaning that you assign to the experience, period. Forgiveness is no longer projecting out your pain. Forgiveness is the end of illusion. And in an era where illusions are gonna multiply, forgiveness is more than spiritual. It's literally protective. Remember, I told you that the only reason why you feel fear is because of attack thoughts inside of you, not because of anything that's happening out here. And the generational impact of this is huge. And this is why it matters beyond just us, beyond just you. Because what gets passed down is not just a story, it's a state of consciousness, it's a state of the nervous system. And when false perception runs a woman's perception, she passes down fear as normal. But think about it. When true perception is trained inside of her, which is what we do inside the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary, her children inherit something completely different. They inherit clarity, boundaries from a state of consciousness of Christ, peace, discernment, devotion without dependency. That's generational healing. And it's not an identity, it's the outcome. It's the outcome. And so, how do we practice true perception? Well, it's not more information, believe it or not. It's a decision. In a moment when you feel urgency, intensity, fear, attachment, or pressure, this is you have to stop. And then you have to ask these four very important questions. Is this asking me to outsource my authority? Is this increasing my peace or feeding my adrenaline and cortisol? Does this lead me inward to God or outward to a person? Is this love or is this just temporary relief? Then, after you ask these questions, you can say, God, Holy Spirit, however you speak to higher power, interpret this for me. And that's it. And then you wait for a calm knowing. Now, the more that you practice Kundalini Yoga meditation, the easier this becomes. It becomes a very natural process where you're just going through the questions like it's a consciousness. It's like a ritual, right? So it becomes very much easier. At the beginning, you're gonna lack awareness. The problem here is that we're not aware. We're not self-aware. And we're unwilling to become self-aware. First of all, because our nervous systems are hijacked, cortisol and adrenaline, chronic stress and trauma. We're not present. So our thoughts drive us like slaves. They before we know it, we're back in our childhood or we're back to saying all these things negatively about ourselves and we don't even know how to stop the flood. We're not even aware we're in the flood. It's just that's the new normal. So the real problem with these four questions is that you got to develop your awareness. Kundalini yoga is the mother of awareness. And what she does is through the regulation of the nervous system and the brain, you become aware of what it is that needs to be changed and not from a place of guilt or shame. It's from a place of like, gosh, I'm feeling better. Like my nervous system is regulating, less adrenaline, less cortisol. Do I really need this thought? Do I really need this action? Do I really need this habit? Those memories start to fall off from the body. So awareness, you develop it. And awareness in itself is the regulating moment. The miracle doesn't happen when your outer life changes. It's you being willing to see things differently. That's awareness. So we make this harder than we think. True perception is our birthright, but it starts with awareness. And you develop awareness by regulating your nervous system through Kundalini Yoga meditation and also through A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy, which brings healing at the level of the mind. True perception is available whenever you want it. It's your birthright. You are the Christ. And the cool thing about it is that if it's achieved in one area, it's going to transfer into everything in your life, your money, your relationships, romantic, children, parents, everything. And that's why it's the most important training of this next era. Not predictions, not personalities, not even spiritual entertainment. Sight, Christ's vision, true perception. Now, in a world where reality blurs, that's where true protection becomes your sovereignty. Perception, excuse me. And true perception, remember, it's never going to be outside of you. It's the Christ in you. And that's exactly what we rebuild inside the inner sanctuary, in the sacred Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary. So God can lead you from within, not outside of you. Now, there's a lot of obstacles to this. One of the things that we worked on this month with our community, or we focused on, was the attainment of peace in A Course in Miracles. And Lizzie took us through that journey. And there are some serious obstacles to our peace. And that is what prohibits us from living in true perception. Now, I'm not going to go deeply detailed into them, but I'm just going to share the three obstacles that block us from peace. And remember, if you come from a family that had a lot of patterns of generational trauma, like being raised by a parent who was depressed, who went through their own abuse, violence, who was going through addiction, maybe there was abandonment in your lineage. I mean, so many different things that become chronic stress due to trauma, which becomes complex post-traumatic stress. And because of that, we have generations and generations and generations that have never even lived in peace. And that's what A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy is healing at the level of mind so that we can connect with that frequency again. And biologically or biophysically, what is it? It's a regulated nervous system. What is faith? There's a science of neuroplasticity behind faith and peace. That if your nervous system, if you re-educate it from chronic stress, cortisol, and adrenaline, then peace is very much going to be attainable. Why wouldn't it be? You're not running those hormones in your body anymore that make you believe you're still living in survival. So there's three main things that are obstacles that keep us away from peace, which keep us away from true perception, which is what we're going to need in this age of Aquarius now that Saturn and Neptune are 0 degrees of Aries. Now, the first one, like I said, we go deep inside of our community with this. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what this looks like. But the first obstacle is, believe it or not, our attraction of guilt. It's insane how much guilt produces fear of love because love would never look on guilt at all. Love looks only on truth, and truth it recognizes itself. So truth recognizes the truth. That's why you listen to these things. It's because your cells remember the truth, these podcast episodes. So you recognize yourself in others when you perceive the truth in them too. And love naturally sees what is true. Fear cannot tolerate that. Now, love versus fear as messengers is key here because the attraction of guilt is real. There's two type of message systems. Love messengers come gently. Even if it's something that you have to end or break, the ego speaks loudly, urgently, and makes you believe like the world is falling. Even if these messages are about leaving a relationship per se, they come to you gently. They don't come to you aggressive. Now, fear's messengers, they're harsh. They're trained to seek guilt, to look at sin, to look at all these scraps of evil. And the thing is that you can't send fear and receive love because what you give to others is what you're giving to yourself, right? So if the internal signals feel like calm, clear, neutrality, that's love's messengers, right? If they're anxious, urgent, and harsh, that's fear's messengers. And this matters a lot for peace because looking at your life, calculating what's next, what's bracing for the next thing to happen, trying to control in life, that bracing is a cue of you need to come back to your center and guilt is driving your life. You think about it. If forgiveness is framed as self-preservation and protection, without forgiveness, the message sent is fear. And then that fear is going to return. And then we get stuck in these guilt cycles. Why? Well, because at the core, we do know that we are the Christ. And when we don't act from a state of love, we feel so guilty about that, even when we cannot forgive others, but we don't know that that's the real reason why we feel guilty. So then we project it out. So it's a constant loop of, I've been told I'm separate from God, so I can't have peace in me because I'm an inherent sinner. Because I listen to all these fear messengers instead of learning how to master love. Learning how to master love is a skill set that has to be developed. And the way it's developed is through life and how willing you are every time you go into these states of fear and guilt to see through Christ's eyes. Again, you don't have to finish the work. You just have to be aware, my God, I am operating from a state of guilt and I keep attracting this to me. I'm willing now to see things differently. And that's why in our community, you don't know what you don't know. You got to develop the nervous system safety through Kundalini Yoga meditation and A Course in Miracles spiritual psychotherapy in order to then become aware of how you are basically using guilt to never feel peace within you because your brain is protecting you from it. Now, the other thing about these obstacles to peace is obstacle number two is that the belief that the body is valuable. And when I'm talking about the body, is our identity. Like our body, with A Course in Miracles, what Jesus says is that we develop all these crazy identities when we go through trauma. I'm broken, I'm not good enough, I'm a sinner, I'm angry, all these stories. And this is very much closely related to guilt because guilt becomes manifest in your body. And when guilt is not released, you project it. It gets stored out, but you're constantly trying to project it. And you project it many times as illness, as disease, as shutting down. So fear and guilt about possibly doing something to someone is how we then get addicted to the identity of the body or who we think we are, the mask we're wearing, the role we're playing. And so the point here is not to blame yourself. It's to notice how emotions are seeking an outlet. It's to know that you're not a body. Even sickness, there's a huge teaching inside of A Course in Miracles, spiritual psychotherapy about sickness and how, especially after the pandemic, we see sickness as something automatically bad. All this guilt around it because we are so afraid to lose the body. Death. That's number three. We're going to go into the third obstacle of attainment of peace. Sickness is not bad. It's literally the body forcing a reset. The body is so intelligent and so wise. If you went through all of my podcast episodes on the systems of the body, wow, we have enlightened bodies. So our body is not punishing us, our body's not forcing us to suffer. When we get sick, it's just a slowdown. It's just a return center to the moment. Think about crying and tears. They're technologies to release and purge. And we tend to hide illnesses. We tend to isolate sick people. We tend to treat sickness as shameful because we think we're a body. But we're not a body. We're infinite soul having this human experience. Peace is natural, but we fight cycles of the body. We fight cycles of our life and we judge ourselves. And it's so important that we have to understand that every season, like the Wheel of Fortune inside the tarot, sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, but there is no good or bad. There are seasons, not identities. And why we block peace and true perception in our lives is because we have all of these identities that need to be healed at the level of the mind through the spiritual psychotherapy and meditation. Now, the third obstacle is the craziest one. And this is what Jesus calls the attraction of death. Now, this one is layered, and most people, it will go right over their head until they rewire their nervous system and their brain. But death is an obstacle to peace, not just a fear. What seems to be fear of death is really an attraction to death. Now, that sounds insane, right? But why we're attracted to death? Why? Because we're still trying to fix the past. Think about it. People that have a hard time transitioning in their last moments, they have not made peace with their past. People that are afraid to die have not ever learned to live because they still live in the past. We try to use the future to repair what happened in the past. So we say things, especially as a mother, like think of a mother who's really afraid of transitioning and leaving her kids behind. Well, will she say things like, I can't die until I teach my child what I wasn't taught? How about you learn to live and you wouldn't be afraid of dying? So the fear of death is tied to unresolved guilt, unfinished repair, fantasies, and unhealed past narratives. So what's the solution here? If you really want peace, you got to release the past. The future is not going to fix the past. There's these meditators from Nepal who they, they did like scientific studies on them meditating on death every single day. And it actually lowered cortisol levels. It changed their nervous system in a really positive way. It changed their brains on a really positive way. Why? Because there was detachment. They were not afraid of transitioning. And in the West, we have I mean, I did a whole episode on this on the Day of the Dead in November, if you want to go check it out. But the whole thing about it is the real reason why we're afraid of this is not because of the unknown, but it's because of our past. Peace comes from the now. Peace comes from forgiveness. Peace comes from letting the past be reinterpreted rather than corrected through control. So we are actually afraid and we choose our own death. We attract it. We unconsciously think this world is too much. I'd rather just move forward. And you have to think about it. No one dies unless they choose to. Jesus Christ teaches this inside of the course and also in scripture. He chose that and he didn't die. And there was this amazing man. I remember when my grandmother transitioned in 2022, we went to bury her, and her funeral services were in Mexico. And there was this one guy, his name was Caboose, and he was a friend of the family, or he basically was a friend of the rancho because it's a small little rancho in Mexico. And this guy, at a funeral, and where they're drinking a lot of alcohol, by the way, he tells my husband is there, my sons are there, my dad is there, my uncles are there, and he tells my dad and everyone, you choose your own death in this lifetime. And they're like, what are you talking about? He's like, I think he had been shot like 3 times, different times. One time he got shot like 10 times. He was ran over. I mean, I think he had like 5, 6 near-death experiences. And he said that every time there was a choice whether he wanted to stay or move forward or transition, right, basically. And he always chose to stay back. And I mean, again, think about this. Think about the near death experience stories that we hear so often. It's like the worst disease that someone can have is depression. Because when you have depression, you don't have prana, your emotions are overwhelming, you you feel like life there's no meaning, right? So if you don't have meaning for life, then you think it's just easier if you just transition, right? So that's what he was saying. He was saying, you choose your death. I'm here because I chose not to. And it's not presented as blame here. It's a spiritual responsibility to release fear. The real reason why you're not at peace and you have this attraction towards death is because you haven't healed the past. So you don't live in the now. I mean, think about this. And then I've had to, that's one of the most beautiful things about my healing journey is that now my parents are go through life, right? My in-laws, people are around me. And instead of me trying to save them, I can become a token of peace, of neutrality when they move through illnesses and things of that nature. Because if I'm not neutral and if I'm unconscious and in a lot of pain, that's not going to help them. That's only going to make them more sick. And that's going to not support their journey. So it's being able, a true cycle breaker. And when you heal yourself and you've sat with your own pain and develop compassion, then you don't make what someone else is going through about you. And you can absolutely be with people during their last moments and create a safe space for them to feel safe to move through what they're moving through. So we need to get out of this. I'm just here to save my family's parents, all these other things. No, it's heal yourself, make peace with your past so that you can be a token, a vehicle of consciousness of love in the present. Peace literally is a way that you can support others through life, but more importantly, yourself, and not become attached to your body or have this fear of living because death is inevitable. So there's these three things why we cannot come into true perception that block us from peace. It's these obstacles that through the spiritual psychotherapy of A Course in Miracles, which is what we teach inside the sanctuary, and through Kundalini Yoga meditation, that you can actually release, that you can actually heal, that you can actually learn to feel safe in your body again, so that you can discern, so you can use your gifts, that hypervigilant brain, the telepathy, the ability to connect and read energy without feeling woo or something is wrong with you, or without knowing how to use that power for the highest good. So, as you can see, it is our birthright to accept the atonement, which is what Jesus Christ uh, teaches us in A Course in Miracles and in Scripture. It is our birthright to live in true perception. That's sovereignty. It is our birthright to find and connect with peace in our bodies, in our mind, and in our spirit. And with everything that is happening in the world and the massive changes that are coming, especially after this transit in February 2026, it becomes the path. It becomes the focus. And that's why virtual sanctuaries like the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary not only exist, but are vital, vital to the earth, the new earth that we are all creating with every breath, with every thought, with every belief. And so I want you all to get excited about 2026 and beyond. Not just with what we're doing here in our community, the Sovereign Sister Movement, the Sovereign Sister Sanctuary, but with what's happening in the world, because that's what they want to distract us from all the amazing miracles and the way God is showing up in such a big way, because we're all praying and reconnecting back by rebuilding that inner temple. Now, in the community here, the Sovereign Sister Movement podcast and sanctuary, 2026 and beyond is filled with clarity, detachment, purpose, surrender, and just the ability trust, to trust and to live in faith because God is moving through us. And 2026 is the true core of this rebuilding of the inner sanctuary where women not only just feel safe in their bodies, but they can discern as something that has been trained in a capacity to be able to end trauma bonding patterns and to be able to end ways that they have been manipulated before in the past. February 2026 is about Christ consciousness, a lived experience in your life, not performed, no mask, no dogmas or doctrines. It's about love without self abandonment, surrender without submission, protection from manipulation. And when I think about the things that we're working through in our community and in this movement that God has channeled through me, I think about all the incredible outcomes that are already occurring in my life and in the lives of our community members and sisters. Because it really is about leadership without performance. It's about clearing scarcity and nervous system rewiring and brain rewiring so that we can truly design and rebuild this inner sanctuary as something real, not as something that is false or hype or temporary or a fad. The era that we're entering into, it demands participation, not passivity, not at all. Kundalini yoga is not for the yogi who's gonna sit in a cave and meditate. It is for the householder like you and me, where we're being asked to accept the kingdom of heaven that God is bestowing upon us when we do graduate and when we do go beyond healing but accept the Christ consciousness within us. And the question we will keep returning to this 2026 and beyond is what I am consuming serving me and humanity, or is it only power and profit? And this is where your discernment, your nervous system, and your brain are going to come in key. Because if it serves humanity, it's going to serve all the women and it's going to serve the world in becoming sovereign. Now, I want to close with this. In times where reality does blur, sovereignty becomes sacred. It's no coincidence that so many people are using that word now. And if you don't rebuild the inner sanctuary, the world is going to offer you substitutes like it has for such a long time. But Christ consciousness and the truth of who you are, beautiful high priestess cycle breaker, God experiencing herself through you. This is living now through our incarnation, our body, our mind, our spirit, the world, the choices that we make. It's living through your leadership and what your lineage inherits because you're choosing God, love, peace over survival. And it's not all love and light. It requires confronting shadow parts of ourselves and our lineage that truly we didn't have the nervous system capacity to do before. It requires sometimes stepping outside of our cultural and religious norms. It requires sometimes being called and seen as the black sheep who stirs things up. But truly, what it really is all about, and if you want to walk into 2026 with us in this sovereignty, is about a regulated nervous system, a rewired brain that can surrender through God experiencing herself through her, creating sacred temples in the inner that materialize in the physical for all to enjoy. Not just you, not just your lineage, but this entire world. And the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary is where we do this, rewiring our nervous system and our brain through Kundalini Yoga and, of course, the Miracle Spiritual Psychotherapy. And so, of course, we would be honored to be able to recreate and rebuild that inner temple with you. So if this resonates, there's a link below here in the comments, in the descriptions, that you can actually click on to find out more about the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary and to join us in a 2026 that will not only be memorable, but will be the breakthrough year. This is a horse year where we shed the skin in 2025 of the snake. Now we're going to the horse year where, like the Bhagavad Gita, God is leading the chariot, moving forward, no more back. Then this is exactly the community that is here for you to develop that. So the link is in the description below. Find out more. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being part of this community, of this movement. I want to say thank you for all the amazing comments you have left, whether you've agreed with me or not. That's sovereignty. I want to thank you for choosing yourself as a cycle breaker in your life, in your lineage, and in the world. And I want to thank you for remembering who you are, a beautiful, gorgeous, sovereign woman, ready to live a life of embodiment of the Christ, of love, and of peace, where we can discern what's true, what's an illusion, without any fear. So thank you all for being part of this movement, of this community. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Thank you for all the incredible energy you bring. Together, we're more than moving mountains. We're surrendering to the divine within. Have a blessed rest of your 2025, and I will see you next year. Satnam, beautiful sovereign sister.